So this is the second part of the podcast, the report that we will just read off a lot of the text. It's easier than trying to paraphrase it. So let's start with the affluent, energy secure regions and look at the US, Australia, and so on. The United States exhibits the main characteristics of the archetype of fluent, energy secure regions. The world's largest economy with abundant renewable energy resources, the United States has the opportunity to build a secure and reliable energy system on the foundation of renewable energy. However, the current trajectory is not at the pace and scale the global pathway requires to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees C. There are 6 high priority measures that could be taken to help the United States embark on a more orderly energy transition. US wants to be the leader in advocating climate action, but it itself has to lead by example, and it has always faced issues in terms of internal disagreements on what to do about climate, whether climate is even a human caused problem or not, and so on and so forth. Fossil fuel industry is very strong, etc. Biden administration has made some progress, but still a long way to go. So here, designing and developing a capital efficient and affordable energy system is one. Strengthening supply chains to provide stable access to raw materials, components, and skilled labor is the second one. Securing access to adequate land with high load factors for the deployment of renewables is the third one. Fourth, reforming transmission development to include proactive planning, fast-track permitting, and systematic consideration of transmission alternatives. Fifth one, creating market mechanisms for expanding firm capacity to ensure reliable and adequate clean energy supply. If this doesn't work, people are not going to trust the system in terms of transitioning. Accelerating technological innovation to ensure timely deployment of new clean technologies. So the transition is going to be very critical, especially with even details like range anxiety when people want to switch to EVs and so on. For Australia, it exhibits the main characteristics of the affluent, energy secure regions as well. Rich in fossil fuels, an enviable reserve of critical minerals and renewables potential, the country has the natural endowment needed to prosper from embarking on an energy transition. Australia has the opportunity to become an exporter of green energy and critical materials to support the energy transitions of neighboring countries. An orderly energy transition could enable Australia to add approximately Australian dollar 55 billion to the economy each year through 2035 and 20,000 direct jobs. Australia has been a big exporter of coal, but now it can go the other way and be a good citizen of the world. Australia has also faced some issues in terms of climate change denial, and so on. In some ways, Australia could be a role model for how fossil fuel rich countries successfully transitions with minimal economic and social impacts. To seize the opportunities and promote a path to a more orderly energy transition, Australia could consider the following priority measures: expanding firm capacity and transmission to accelerate coal retirements and investing in green alternatives. So keeping coal stranded in the ground is going to be a big challenge for Australia. Securing power supply by strengthening natural gas supply capacity. So obviously this also is not moving out of fossil fuel, but it will be part of the transition. Building infrastructure and implementing incentives to spur investments aimed at decarbonizing industry. And fourth one, mitigating economic and social impacts on local communities affected by the energy transition. Especially there has always been issues with the Aborigines, natives, and so on. The Middle East, the other rich country with affluence and resources. The Middle East encompasses a diverse set of countries from affluent fossil fuel economies to developing ones. So it has United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and then Saudi Arabia, for example, with different energy mixes, emissions trajectories, and levels of affluence. While we evaluated the overall region from a broad perspective, our analysis has focused primarily on the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) countries, exhibiting the main characteristics of affluent energy secure regions archetype, the GCC countries play a prominent role in today's energy landscape as major fossil fuel producers, of course. The Middle East accounts for 31% of global oil production today. As much as 40% of its GDP comes from fossil fuels in some countries. The regions could move towards forward in its energy transition by pivoting to low-carbon upstream technologies such as carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, boosting innovation to drive maturity and cost reductions in clean tech, and accelerating the build-out of policy framework to move towards green alternatives across sectors. The Middle East is positioned to take an important role in the energy transition, potentially as an exporter of clean energy, low-carbon energy, for example, hydrogen and ammonia, and products such as green steel, thanks to a geographic location that connects markets of the West and the East, as well as abundant natural resources such as solar energy. To seize these opportunities and move forward a path to more orderly energy transitions, the Middle East could consider the following priority measures. Promoting investments to scale the supply of CCUS, low-carbon hydrogen and ammonia, while stimulating demand domestically and internationally. Boosting renewables development and facilitating renewable integration by upgrading supporting infrastructure. Incentivizing electrification and energy efficiency in buildings, industry, and transportation sector. Promoting green businesses that are building new energy solutions to diversify the local economy and capture new economic opportunities from the transition. Okay, so the Middle East is positioned to take an important role in the energy transition, potentially as an exporter of clean, low carbon energy, for example, hydrogen and ammonia, and products such as green steel, thanks to a geographic location that connects markets of the West and the East, as well as abundant natural resources such as solar. Just emphasizing the point. The next archetype, affluent energy exposed countries. I won't read these details, but the recommended priority actions: creating resilient at-scale supply chains for key decarbonization technologies, building out energy grid infrastructure to support resilience and reduce barriers to in-region renewables, overcoming land use, societal and regulatory constraints to accelerate development of renewables, redesigning power markets in line with decarbonization and affordability objectives, ensuring affordability of clean technologies to foster their adoption and accelerate energy transition. As for Europe, which obviously has heavy fossil fuel import dependence right now and can use this to become energy independent. So in 2020, the European Union's 27 member states approved the European Green Deal. Europe committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, with an interim target for 2030 of reducing emissions by 55% from the 1990 levels. So it's not energy intensity, but reducing emissions, which makes a big difference. But as we know, the Russian war exposed many issues like dependence on fossil fuels for winter heating, maybe even firing up some coal plants and so on and so forth. Japan. What does it need to do? Developing solutions to overcome land constraints such as offshore wind and rooftop solar to maximize renewables penetration into the energy market and use. Scaling infrastructure and the supply chain to enable hydrogen and ammonia imports that can help meet total energy demand. Remember, Japan has basically no production of fossil fuels. Establishing the value chain for CCUS, including developing equipment and facilities. CCUS is something you have to watch for, because right now there are very few scalable technologies for this, but nonetheless we are relying on the technological promises even for the near-term action like 2030 horizon, which is interesting, and we'll see how it works out. Enhancing transmission capacity and grid resilience, enhancing the current carbon pricing and trading scheme. Okay, so Japan remains unique in terms of its susceptibility to earthquakes and tsunamis, and which led to Fukushima disaster, which led Japan to reconsider nuclear, and then they are slowly inching back after a decade, more than a decade of the accident and the disasters that followed. So we'll see how that goes. Next one, large emissions intensive economies, China and India. Jumping to the actions, limiting and mitigating coal emissions in the power and industry sectors and substituting coal with renewables, enabling and scaling grid connectivity between demand centers and renewable capacity, promoting development of renewable and flexibility solutions while considering enhancements to market structures to deal with these transitions, scaling up hydrogen-based fuels and carbon capture utilization and storage, finally enabling greater carbon transparency and incentivizing the private sector to pursue more ambitious targets. In each of these regional actions there are lots of details that I'm skipping, but for India we'll look at some of those details. So it's a typical large emissions intensive economy in the regional archetype. What does it need to do? Expanding land availability and reducing acquisitions barriers for renewables deployment. This is a big issue in India. Land is gold. Streamlining the contracting process through state utility buy-in to facilitate state and corporate power purchasing agreements. Creating new financial mechanisms to de-risk projects and improving the financial and operational health of distribution companies. So India has this unique combination of private and government playing into the energy market, so there is some issues there. Accelerating the development of green manufacturing capacity sorry, and promoting access to raw materials and local supply chain opportunities. Reducing the carbon intensity of high emissions power and industrial sites. Okay, so India is committed to net zero by 2070. What does it need to do under this rubric of the main actions or the orderly path for energy transitions? Here are some items. Such items exist for each country that we looked at, but I'm only doing this for India. Under each item there are again more details. Firstly, expanding land availability and reducing acquisition barriers for renewables deployment, streamlining the contracting process through state utility buy-in to facilitate state and corporate power purchasing agreements, creating new financial mechanisms to de-risk projects and improving financial and operational health of distribution companies, accelerating the development of green manufacturing capacity and promoting access to raw materials and local supply chain opportunities. These are the actions we already read. Reducing the carbon intensity of high emissions power and industrial sites. I just wanted to re-emphasize that and then leave with this message. India's renewables market has grown in the past 5 years to 10 gigawatts installed per year, reaching a total installed capacity of more than 100 gigawatts in 2022. By some measures, it's ahead of its target and NDC commitments, but for its own energy security, it needs to grow rapidly, and it intends to grow to something like 500 gigawatts by 2030 as a part of its NDCs as well. Looking at developing naturally endowed economies, Latin America, some of the actions here. Streamlining, accelerating and increasing certainty of project permitting and promoting simpler frameworks for public-private collaboration, improving and stabilizing pricing schemes, market designs and guarantees to de-risk energy transition investments and improve access to domestic and international capital. Introducing demand-side measures to promote the switch from fossil to electric and other energy efficient alternatives in transportation, developing regulated carbon tracking mechanisms and markets, and driving green incentives to decarbonize industrial footprints, promoting local manufacturing of parts and equipment and exporting clean energy commodities and products. Finally, developing a qualified regional workforce to support the transition and create socio-economic benefits. Very specific to the region. Finally, Africa. Well, we still have South Asia. There's a lot of text describing where Africa stands, but the continent has an abundance of natural resources, including solar and wind power, minerals, and agricultural land that are needed to scale green manufacturing, build a green transportation sector, and provide energy at low cost for the 600 million people in Africa who are still without it. This is also important for the global effort to reach net zero by 2050. So if the globe as a whole has to reach the targets, then we must carry Africa as well. Although African per capita emissions are on average less than half of those countries, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. The continent accounts for 10% of global annual greenhouse gas emissions. If no steps are taken, emissions are likely to rise as a result of the expected population and economic growth. So economic growth is a must for all countries, and then you have environmental footprint and human development index, per capita GDP, etc. Can you increase the human development index and per capita income and standards of living without increasing environmental footprint? This is a part of the energy transitions, right? So what are the near-term actions to go towards global effort in net zero emissions from African side? Ensuring attractive returns on green development projects to mobilize capital. Deploying green off-grid solutions at scale to provide universal access to energy. So local solar, local wind, and off-grid solutions for refrigeration, animal husbandry, hospitals, etc., etc. Establishing infrastructures supporting environment and regulations to build green industries and realize export opportunities. So obviously Africa is rich in renewable resources and has exported fossil fuel for a while. Now it can begin to export renewable energy as well. Expanding gas pipeline capacity and downstream infrastructure to shift to clean cooking and balance the grid. So it's still by 2030 going to rely very much on fossil fuel. Everybody will. So we have to worry about basically reducing emissions and carbon intensity till that time from fossil fuels themselves. Southeast Asia, again, it's developing at-risk archetype. Actions include creating the conditions for bankable renewables projects and advancing national and regional plans to minimize new coal development and improving efficiency of the existing coal fleet. Electrifying and improving efficiency across sectors to temper growing demand. Adapting local economies to take full advantage of the transitions, driving employment and socio-economic growth across the region. Finally, developing standards and practices for emissions transparency to enable carbon tracking and trading for multinational manufacturers in the region. This has become a hub for manufacturing, even electronics by Apple and so on. So that has to be kept in mind. Amid population's growth and rapid industrialization, Southeast Asia would likely need to scale renewable technologies and accelerate coal decarbonization to move towards a more orderly energy transition. Remember, these are for the 2030 horizon, so fossil fuel is very much going to be part of the game. So we have to always see how we can do an orderly transition by reducing emissions and increasing deployment of renewables, accelerated deployment. A more orderly transition will need to be a just transition, one that recognizes the specific challenges of developing countries and to which collective, global, and unified action finds responses. Okay. Finally, it concludes with key stakeholders that can accelerate action to promote a more orderly transition. Obviously, it talks about governments, corporations, financial sectors, and people who can work together to make this orderly transition possible in the near term in region-specific action items to reach the trajectory or the bending the curve by 2030 to stay on target for below 2 degrees C or even below 1.5 degrees C by 2100 with 67% probability. So the report, as I said, is quite long, and I have shortened it, made it brief, but you should definitely go read it if you need more details. But hopefully the introduction helps as well. Okay.